Welcome students. Today we are going to talk about control and coordination. As you all know, we have voluntary actions and involuntary actions. Not just in animals, we are also animals, humans are also animals, but also in plants. So let's talk about the involuntary actions of plants. Mimosa pudicea. So that is touch me not plant. All of you would have seen it in your garden. When you touch the leaves, it shrinks. That is the involuntary action of Mimosa pudicea. We also have Venus flytrap and a pitcher plant. So the Venus flytrap and the pitcher plant, they trap their prey inside the plant. Like over here you can see a fly, and then over here you can see an insect, and there is a small liquid that is kind of like an acid where it disintegrates and eats the plant, eats the prey. In animals we have involuntary actions like the grass reflex in babies. When you give a finger to a child, a baby, it holds your finger. That is the grass reflex, as you can see in the picture. And then sneezing. That is again an involuntary actions. Other things include breathing, digestion. These are all involuntary actions. Now let's speak about the voluntary actions. The voluntary actions is a very slow process in plants. Phototropism and geotropism. Phototropism is when the plant above the ground grows towards the sun or towards a light source. That is phototropism. Geotropism is when as you can see in the picture, the roots are growing towards the ground, towards the water and the mineral source. That is called the geotropism. These are all voluntary actions, and these are slow in plants. This is dependent on the growth. So the plant grows up towards the sun and the roots grow down towards the ground. We also have independent of growth. So that is the Mimosa pudicea, where it has nothing to do with the growth, but when you touch the leaf, it shrinks. So it has nothing to do with the growth. It is just an action. It is just an involuntary action of the plant. Voluntary action in animals. Like as I said, we are also animals. So running, walking, jumping, eating, drawing, all those things are voluntary actions when we choose to do it consciously. That is a voluntary action. How are all these controlled? How do you know how to do a voluntary action and how to do an involuntary action, how it happens? So that is because we have a system called the nervous system. This nervous system has two primary components. One is the central nervous system. The second one is the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system contains the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system contains the nerves that connects the central nervous system to the rest of the body. I'll show you a picture. Over here, you can see it very clearly. The brain and the spinal cord is the central nervous system. And then the peripheral nerves. This is the peripheral nervous system. So the brain and the spinal cord, they are all connected. The peripheral nervous system, all of them is connected. Like over here, you can see in this picture. The nerves that come to the limbs and the rest of the body and to the face, those are all peripheral, towards the periphery, outside. So that is the peripheral nervous system. And the ones inside, the brain and the spinal cord, that is the central nervous system. We have neurons, which are specialized cells that transmit signals throughout the body. So when we see over here, how do you think these things are connected? The peripheral nervous system, it needs to be connected to the brain, and this brain needs to be connected to the peripheral nervous system. So you have tiny neurons. We have billions of them in our body. So those are the ones that send signals to the central nervous system, from the central nervous system to the peripheral nervous system, and from the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system. So those are the neurons. This is one neuron. It's a single neuron. It is the longest cell of the human body. What is a neuron? A neuron is a structural and functional unit of the nervous system, right? And they are specialized cells that transmit signals throughout the body. So let's say, for example, there is a stimulus. Let's say, for example, a stimulus it could be external, like for example heat or pain. Okay, let's take heat over here. So the stimulus is the heat, okay? And then what happens when we are going to touch a glass of water which is very hot? It's boiling hot, and you're going to touch the vessel. When you touch it, so this is where the peripheral nervous system starts with the tips of the fingers, and then it goes inside the body, and then it goes to the brain. So that, how does it go? That is called an impulse. An impulse is created. Impulse is a movement of energy that causes a reaction. So when there is a stimulus, an impulse is created that causes a response. What happens when you are going to touch a hot body of water? You immediately withdraw. So that happens because of the neurons, because of the central nervous system. A stimulus causes an impulse which causes a response. Like for example, when there is a pinch, what happens? We get pain. So that is a response. Pain is the response. Let's go to the next slide. Oh no, okay. So let's just speak about the structure of the neuron. In neuron we have the dendrites. This is the dendrites, and we have the cell body. Inside the cell body is the nucleus. And from the cell body, we have the axon, then we have the nerve ending, that's at the end. So we have the dendrite, cell body, axon, and the nerve ending. These are the things that contain the neuron, right? Structure of the neuron. This is further explaining how the neuron acts. A stimuli arrives at the dendritic tip of the neuron. Where does it arrive? The stimulus arrives at the dendrite, and from here it goes into the cell body, and from the cell body it travels through the axon, reaching the nerve ending. The stimuli arrives at the dendritic tip of the neuron. It triggers a chemical reaction, from where it creates a electrical impulse, and that travels from the dendrite to the cell body along the axon, then it goes to the nerve ending. As we see over here in the picture again, this is where the electrical impulse is created, and then it travels, this is where the chemical impulse is created, and from here it travels to the dendrite, and from there it travels to the cell body, and from the cell body it travels through the axon and reaches the nerve ending. So when it travels through the axon, that is the impulse, that is where the impulse is created. First we have the triggers the chemical reaction, and then it creates electrical impulse. Travels from dendrite to the cell body along the axon, then to the nerve ending. And then what happens? It goes and connects to the next neuron, right? I'll show you that. In this picture we have two neurons. As you can see, this is the dendrite and this is the cell body which contains the nucleus, and this is the axon and this is the axon terminal. And then again comes another neuron with the cell body and the dendrites, and then the axon and the nerve ending. So the two neurons get connected. Here we have the neurotransmitters, the chemical reaction that happens from one neuron to the other neuron, that junction is called the synapse. When one neuron connects with the other neuron, that junction is called the synapse. You can see it better in this picture. This is one neuron and then this is the other neuron. The first neuron is called the presynaptic neuron, and the second one where the chemical reaction transmits, the chemicals are transmitted, that is the postsynaptic neuron. This is the synapse and this is the synaptic gap. We saw over here that the neurons, they are specialized cells that transmit signals. So what is conducted? An impulse is conducted. And what are the impulses? Let's see how, from where the impulses travel, how they travel, from where to where. So let's see over here, the impulses. We have sensory impulses and then we have the motor impulses. In sensory impulse, the impulses travel from the peripheral, that is the sensory organs, to the central nervous system. And the sensory impulses include touch, pain, temperature. Now we talk about the motor impulses. In the motor impulses, the impulses travel from the central nervous system to the peripheral nervous system. That is the muscles, organs, glands, right? Central nervous system to the periphery, and from over here, periphery to the central nervous system. Some of the examples of motor impulses are the muscle contraction, heart beating, and the hormones that is secreted. Those are secreted by the motor impulses. Let's talk about the reflex arch. What is the reflex arch? A reflex arch is a neural pathway involved in a reflex action. So what did we say? We said that we have a reflex action when there is a stimulus. How does that happen? So that's what we're going to see now. It is by a neural pathway. So that is the reflex arch. In that, what happens is a stimulus triggers the reflex arch. Like we said over here, heat or pain, those are the stimulus which triggers the reflex arch. What happens? There is a receptor in the reflex arch and then there is a set of neurons, that is the sensory neuron, interneuron, motor neuron and effector. I'll tell you what happens in these. This is the reflex arch pathway where we have the receptor, and that is actually a sensory receptor which detects the stimulus. The stimulus is detected in that. After that, it transmits the signal to the brain. So inside the brain, that is the sensory neuron. Transmits signals from receptor to the brain. The interneuron, what does it do? It transmits the signal from the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. And the motor neuron, what it does is, from the motor neuron, the signal is taken to the effector. Which is the effector? It is either a muscle or maybe the skin or the gland. What happens? Let's say over here we have the picture when there is a receptor. This is the receptor. What is the receptor over here? The skin is the receptor. So it has heat. You can sense the heat with the skin, and then from here it is transmitted to the sensory neuron, and from the sensory neuron it goes to the motor neuron, and from the in between the sensory and the motor neuron is the interneuron, and then from there it sends the signal to the effector, that is the muscle over here. So immediately we withdraw. Like I said, when we touch something when it's very hot and then we take our hand close to it, and immediately there is a reflex. That happens because we have the reflex arch. That is a pathway that happens. So what happens? There is a receptor and then there is a sensory neuron, interneuron, motor neuron, and then we have the effector.